Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So we mentioned last week about what is possible and impossible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to create anything or destroy anything. And we said included in that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could guide us and could send us astray. And he could send us prophets. He could not send us prophets. And he could destine that we know what is right and follow it, or we know what is right and we don't follow it. And we have no haqq, we have no right over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to breathe, to eat, to exist, to go to Jannah, to do what is right, to be here talking about Islam. Right? So this is an unbelievably important emotional relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-ubudiyya. You don't have a right, He has rights. Right? So in Islam, we don't like the idea that this is my right. It's not really, that's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. Right? It's not something, a right that you imagine. So the sense of I deserve this, right? I deserve that. Why? So being angry, for example, when you're wronged. Why are you angry when you're wronged? Are you angry because you have been wronged, or are you angry because Allah's right regarding you has been wronged? There's a big difference. So say, for example, he insults me on social media to my face. If I'm angry, personally angry, that means I have a sense of pride. I have a sense of my own dignity, a sense of my own self, and he has taken that away from me. And I'm angry, and I'm going to say something back at him. As opposed to, I don't deserve respect. I don't deserve anything. I don't deserve to exist. I don't deserve to exist. I don't deserve to be respected, particularly if you look at the way I've lived my life. And so I'm only angry with him because he has disobeyed Allah and Allah's right regarding me, right? I see myself, for example, as a mushaf that's been thrown on the floor, or as something that as some haram thing that's been done, as opposed to me. Very different kind of way of talking to people, right? Very different kind of way of talking to people. So in terms of you're angry with your child, you can't show disrespect to me. You have affronted me. That's wrong. You shouldn't be angry with your child for affronting you. You're angry with your child because you fear that Allah's punishment for that child. Your child does something really bad, and you're really upset, meaning you really care for the child, and you're really concerned that this child really needs to learn not to do that, because that's really bad. Okay? As opposed to an affront to me, right? Husband and wife relationship. I can't believe he just said that to me. I can't believe she just did that. That's so unfair. Do you deserve anything? Yeah, I did this. Did you do anything? You haven't done anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with certain good deeds, and that's it. So when you feel there's an affront to what you've done for a relationship, or an affront what you've done for a person, that's a totally wrong way of thinking. It's a natural way of thinking, but it's a totally wrong way of thinking, because you are a slave of Allah. You have no rights. You have no rights. So you are angry for the sake of Allah that your rights have been taken away from you, and you're compassionate for the other person. You're scared for the other person, lest they be punished for not giving you your rights. But that's a totally different relationship, totally different feeling, right? One is totally, you're standing as if you're looking at something from far away, right? So your wife does something that really hurts your feelings, or your husband does something that really hurts your feelings. You have no rights. You're nobody. You don't exist. You're a slave. Allah sends you whatever He sends you. That's it. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. From you step back 10 miles and you see, oh, here is an individual whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded to be given these rights and forbidden them to be treated in this way. And so that's wrong. So you're angry for the sake of Allah. And here's a man or a woman who has done something haram. And al-dhulmu dhulumat yawm al-qiyamah, right? Oppression will be darknesses and judgment day. So you're scared. I fear you, oh husband. I fear for you, husband, for speaking to me in that way. That's very cruel. That's very nasty. That's very unappreciative. You should fear Allah concerning me. And I'm not doing that because I'm angry personally. I'm doing that because I care for you. Right? And you, wife, you can't talk to me like that. That's a way that Allah hates. Allah hates that kind of way. So this is not akhlaq. This is not something that Allah loves. Why are you talking like that? So a very different way of thinking. Very different way of thinking. Right? So the Mu'tazili, I have rights, and I don't only have rights on other people, I have rights on Allah. Why didn't Allah do this? Why didn't Allah do that? It's amazing, right? The Mu'tazili is one step closer to the shaitani way of thinking. I can't do sujood. Whereas the Sunni is رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا وَإِن لَمْ تَغْفِرْ لَنَا وَتَرْحَمْنَا لَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. Right? Is Allah, I've wronged myself. I know I've wronged myself. And what I see in my life is product of my actions. That's all. And I have no rights to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His kindness, He keeps me alive. And out of His kindness, He keeps me as a believer. Out of His kindness, He keeps me caring about the deen. I'm here today because I care about the deen. I care about my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do I have a right to that? You don't have a right to that. Do you have a right to do sujood a second time? You're in sujood right now. Do you have a right to do sujood again? You have no right to do sujood again. Do you have a right to come into the masjid again? No. Do you have a right to ever say Allah's name ever again? Pure lutf of Allah, pure kindness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He gives you that the grace that you exist and the grace that you turn to Him and the grace that you said Allah, you said Alhamdulillah. Maybe this is the last time you ever say it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes it away. You never say Allah's name ever again. You have no more relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have no right to it. So this is the maqam that we have. This is the way that we are is an abd. You are a slave of Allah. You have no rights. That's a very, very, very deep thing. And every single thing to you is pure. You're just standing there and Allah's firing protons after protons after protons at light speed, blessings at you. You're just an object of the Rahmaniyya. That's it. You're just the slave of Ar-Rahman. Right? It's very important to understand that. Okay, so he says, وَمَنْ يَقُلْ فِي الصَّلَاحِ وَجَبَ عَلَى الْإِلَهِ قَدْ أَسَاءَ الْأَدَبَ. So we mentioned this last week, and whoever states that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is required, he is duty bound to choose what is in my personal interests, has his lack of proper understanding of and courtesy towards the divine is immense. Wow, you're really rude. That's really a vile way of thinking. Okay, and then he says, continuing with the discussions of the Mu'tazila. So the Mu'tazila, they believe, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just, and so He doesn't force us, He doesn't destine that we do bad deeds, because that would be wrong, and Allah doesn't do wrong. And so we say, no, Allah can do whatever He wants. And another issue and so remember the Mu'tazila, they called themselves Ahl al-Tawheed wal-Adl, the people of pure Islamic monotheism and divine justice. Right? So this is to do with divine justice, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's always nice, He always chooses what's on our best interests. The another issue, the recurrent issue, is that if you remember, on the other side of the spectrum from the Mushabbiha, from the anthropomorphists. And so they said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not an object. And obviously we believe as Sunnis that Allah is not an object. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not in a place or a time, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates place and time. Therefore, you will not see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not an object, it's logically impossible to see something that is not an object. So is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so like, where was Allah before He created space and time? Which place in space was Allah before He created space? Nowhere. He doesn't have a relationship to space. Right? It's like asking me, Sayyid, where are you in the number sequence? Like, sorry? In the number sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where are you in the number sequence? He's like, I don't understand, Sheikh Farid. Like, I don't understand what you're saying. So yeah, when you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, keep going. Where is Sayyid? Like, that's not a question. Well, why is that not a question? Because Sayyid is not a number. Oh yeah, good point. So that's not a question to ask, right? Or where is Sister Maryam in the alphabet? So you mean, her first name M? You mean the M? No, no, her herself. Like, where is she in the alphabet? She says, I'm not a letter. I'm a human being. So where are you in the alphabet? So, I'm not in the alphabet. That's something. I'm not in that category. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not in the category of objects and beings like that. He's not the concept of hawadith, of things that have come into being in time and space. He's outside, he's above that, right? And so they logically, right, they say, well, how could a photon bounce off something that is beyond space and time and hit you in the eye so that you can see it? Honestly, right? So it's pretty logical argument that they're saying, right? It's logical. They're saying you can't see something that's not an object because it's not an object, right? And so we said the Mu'tazili approach is Allah is not an object, therefore you can't see him. The Mushabbiha, Mujassima, anthropomorphist approach is Allah is an object. So Allah, you can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's told us in the Quran, therefore he is an object. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a height, he has a width, he has a depth, right? And then we said the Sunni approach is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have a height, a depth, a width. He is not in space, he's not in time. You can't ask where is Allah or when is Allah or how is Allah or why is Allah. That's not a question because why means what Allah needs. Like why did that happen? I.e., what was needed for that to happen, right? That's not a question. And Allah doesn't need anything. Or why did Allah do that? I.e., what motivated Allah? What moved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What did Allah need? Why did Allah need to do that? Allah doesn't need to do anything. He doesn't need anything. We need things. You can ask me, why did you say those words? Why are you teaching this class? Right? Whereas with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't make any sense to ask him why, because the context is he needs something, but he doesn't need anything. So the Sunnis, we say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not an object, but you can see him. So, well, that doesn't make any sense, does it? I mean, honestly, what is the most logical answer here? That Allah is an object and that you can see him? No, that's not true. Okay, Allah's not an object, but you can see him? That doesn't make sense. Logical answer would be the Mu'tazili answer. Mu'tazili answer is Allah's not an object, so therefore you can't see him. That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense to me and you, right? Because it's not an object, you can't see it. So he says the opposite. He says, وَجْزِمْ أَخِي بِرُؤْيَةِ الْإِلَهِ. He says, don't just accept it, but be solidly firm in your belief. Oh, my brother, بِرُؤْيَةِ الْإِلَهِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be seen in the next life. وُجُوهُ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ إِلَى رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. Faces on that day will be shining bright, looking at their Lord. Right? كَلَّا إِنَّهُمْ عَنْ رَبِّهِمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ لَمَحْجُوبُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the punishment of the kuffar, that no, on that day they will not be able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the worst punishment for the believers for the disbelievers is that they will not see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore the believers will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And and the Prophet ﷺ told us in multiple hadiths that they said, will we see Allah? I said, yes. They said, how can we all see Allah? Like, won't we crowd each other out? I said, no, it's not possible. You can't crowd each other out, right? That you will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Allah, the Prophet ﷺ told us, it's well established, mutawatir, it's in the Quran, it's well established. So then Sunnis, explain yourself, because honestly, you don't make much sense. How could you see something if it's not an object? The only two arguments that really make sense is Allah is an object, and therefore you can see him, which is obviously problematic because he's not an object. And then the other argument is he's not an object, therefore you can't see him. Those two make sense, but you Sunnis, you have a funny answer. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, you're kind of like suspending logic, right? And now we're going to go back to the beginning of the book. Like, aha, what do you mean by logic? So he said right in the beginning, that there are Three types of categories. He says أقسام حكم العقل لا محالة هي الوجوب ثم الاستحالة ثم الجواز ثالث الأقسام فافهم منحت لذة الأفهام. Okay, so he said right in the beginning that he says أقسام العقل, the categories of law, the way of categorizing things of the intellect are three. Something is logically possible, something is logically necessary, and something that's logically impossible. So we go to the Mu'tazili and say, Habibi, is it logically impossible to see something that's an object, or is it scientifically possible to see something that's an object? Meaning what we call al-hukm al-adi. There's a difference in al-hukm al-aqli, which is that's logically impossible. Like that doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything. As opposed to that is conventionally impossible. That doesn't normally happen. Right? A miracle doesn't normally happen. It is mustahil adatan, impossible looking at the norms of the universe. Right? What happened with Sayyidina Ibrahim in the fire is mustahil adatan. Jaiz aqlan. It is normally impossible. Right? Look at the normal science of the universe, that's impossible. Right? Assuming that there was this great fire, which is an exothermic reaction, right? An exothermic reaction of that size would create enough heat to burn somebody. So then how is it that scientifically he didn't get burnt? Well, the laws of science were suspended. A miracle happened. That's the concept of a miracle. Okay? And so the Isra Miraj, how does somebody travel that kind of distance and that kind of thing? All these different, etc. This is a what's called mustahil adatan. It is normally, given the normal rules of science, that is impossible. But it happened. Okay? But it happened. And so there's a big difference. So when the Mu'tazili says that's impossible, what does he really mean? He means ذلك مستحيل عادة, right? That is looking at the conventional norms of the universe that we conventionally see. The way that eyesight works is that photons bounce off an object, reflect into your eye, get turned upside down, transferred into something, and then you see. That's how things normally work. Okay? So therefore, yes, it would be a miracle, right, to see something that's not an object. That's what they mean. That's what the Mu'tazili means. The Mu'tazili would say, well, obviously you couldn't see Allah because he's not an object, because that would be a miracle, right? You couldn't see something that's not an object. And we say, yeah, that's what's going to happen. It's going to be a miracle. So there'll be lots of miracles in Jannah, right? I mean, isn't the whole of Jannah miraculous? Isn't like where are the normal rules of life and science in Jannah and hellfire, right? Like in heaven, in hell, you're not alive, but you're not dead. It doesn't make any sense. How are you not alive, not dead? Right? How is it you survive? Like you should die, shouldn't you? Like if you go through that much pain and right, how is it you come back to like that doesn't make sense. Coming out of the grave is impossible, right? So the Mu'tazila, they have a problem, is they have, in this point here, they have crossed a line that many modern people do. The way that they think is a scientism mentality, right? Scientism mentality is what? Is that given that it is normally scientifically impossible to see something without it being an object, therefore it's not going to happen, right? But that's not true. We say a miracle will happen and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make us see something that it is a non-object. She says, but that's impossible. It's not impossible. So what's the difference between the Sunni approach to saying that Allah is not an object, but you can still see him, and a Christian approach for saying God didn't die, but he did die? Like God isn't Jesus, but he is Jesus. What's the difference? When a Christian says God died on the cross, I mean, he didn't die on the cross. I mean, he did die on the cross. Like, you don't actually make any sense. You are saying things that don't make any sense. He is three and one but one. Like, it is actually illogical. And it is actually impossible to understand because you are literally saying nothing. Understanding the Trinity is like saying, I believe that 2 + 2 = 5. And when I say that, I'm just suspending mental processing. I'm not actually processing it. Like I'm not actually saying anything. So nobody actually can believe in the Trinity because it doesn't literally make any sense. But they just kind of feel it, meaning they like the idea that God went through pain and like the idea that God became man, but they're not actually thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're thinking about something else. Right? And that's why they have a whole problem. It's called Christology. Like, how on earth do we explain the Trinity? Because it doesn't actually, you can't write it down in real words, right? They'll quote, for example, Gospel of John, and it's very kind of like spiritual. So spiritual is fine, right? If you want to express something on a spiritual level, right? I mean, the Prophet ﷺ spiritually is Allah in the sense that you have to listen to him, but he's not Allah, is he? It's not the same thing. Your parents are Allah. The Kaaba is Allah in that you face that direction. The Mus'haf is Allah in the sense that you show respect, but it's not literally Allah, right? So a Christian is suspending logic in that they are not actually saying anything that's meaningful. Whereas a Sunni is not suspending logic. He is not saying something that is mustahil aqlan. He's not saying something that is logically impossible. He's saying something that is conventionally impossible. And he's claiming a miracle, which is not a big deal, right? He's just saying a miracle happened. Okay, so to repeat the three madhabs, Mu'tazila, Allah is not an object and you won't see him. The Mushabbiha and the Mujassima, the people who say that Allah is like creation or that Allah has a body, right? These are a sect of Sunni Muslims who had this claim. Okay, they say Allah does have a body. He is in space and time. He does move around. He hasn't, and so therefore, obviously, like he could have a shadow, for example, because light, like, he has an object, right? So light can bounce off it, not a problem. And then Sunni Islam is what? Allah is not an object, but you can see him. Why? Because it's jaiz aqlan, right? إذ الوقوع جائز بالعقل وقد أتى به دليل نقلي. He says why? Because it is rationally possible. It's not rationally impossible. Okay, but a very important thing, Mu'tazila and modern science sees that conventional norms, scientific norms, and rational norms are the same thing. This is a very key thing in the philosophy of science, right? David Hume and other people are part of this process, that there's no difference. Like the logic is not very useful at all because there's no such thing as a rational thing. It's just empirical. Empirical and rational are the same, right? So they're the same thing, whereas we don't believe that they're the same thing. And the Mu'tazila, they make it the same thing. That doesn't happen. Magic doesn't happen. It's just made up by weird people. They don't believe in magic either, right? The Mu'tazila, right? Certain modern Muslims would be, yeah, this whole a load of nonsense. Magic, what are you talking about? That doesn't happen. That's not scientific, is it? Right? Where's the scientific evidence for magic? There's none. Okay, forget it. So you're going to find lots of modern thinkers who are very affected by the Western scientism. They are by default Mu'tazili, right? They'll be Mu'tazili, right? They'll say things like, the Prophet ﷺ couldn't possibly marry a 6-year-old. That would be weird, right? That way of thinking is Mu'tazili, because Mu'tazili, they say the mind defines what's good and bad, right? And a lot of people are like that. A lot of people are just natural without knowing that they're Mu'tazili, right? And the I'tizal is a very attractive way of thinking, right? They're very common mistakes, right? But it's a huge mistake. So we say, yes, obviously scientifically that doesn't happen, but a miracle will happen, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enable us to see him, even though he will not be in an object. He's not an object, and so which direction will you see Allah in then?
Yeah.
Just 1 second, please. Right, which direction will you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in? He won't be in a direction. He's not in space and time. Okay, well, how tall is he going to be then? He doesn't have a height. Well, how wide is he going to be? He doesn't have a width. How deep is he going to be? He doesn't have a depth. Yeah, but I don't understand that. That's okay. You don't have to understand it. Right? Do we understand Jannah? We don't understand Jannah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. Right? تتجافى جنوبهم عن المضاجع يدعون ربهم خوفا وطمعا ومما رزقناهم ينفقون. فلا تعلم نفس ما أخفي لهم من قرة أعين جزاء بما كانوا يعملون. Right? No soul knows what is hidden for them of the most unbelievable pleasures of paradise. No soul understands that. You can't understand Jannah. We can talk about Jannah, but we can't really explain Jannah to people who are not in Jannah. So not being able to understand something is different to something being logically impossible. Right? Logically impossible is Jesus is alive. God is Jesus, but he's not Jesus. That's logically impossible. That doesn't make any sense. Right? You are actually saying something that is logically illogical, but what the Sunni is saying is not illogical. So A, it is logically possible, even if it's conventionally impossible. And two, وَقَدْ أَتَى بِهِ دَلِيلٌ نَقْلِي. And evidence has been confirmed. It's in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala um, mentions it in the Quran, number one. And similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Sayyidina Musa, قال لن تراني ولكن انظر إلى الجبل فإن استقر مكانه فسوف تراني. He says, you will not see me now, but rather look at the mountain, and if it stays where it is, then you will see me. So if it stays where it is, then you will see me. That means, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, if this thing happens, which is possible, then you will see me. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused the mountain to be destroyed. So therefore he didn't see him. But the point is, he said, if this possible thing, which is that the mountain will stay in its place, if this possible thing happens, then you will see me. So given that what he said was the condition was possible, then the result is also possible. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us implicitly in the Quran that seeing Allah is possible. Go ahead, Ashar, you had a question?
Yeah, sure. So these mutezelites, how do they, with their theory, which is mostly based on scientific uh, laws, how do they explain angels for them
For the
or stuff
Mu'tazila?
in the ghaib? Yeah,
Yeah, so
what's their
they have fundamental problems, right? They have fundamental problems, Mu'tazila. So
ah
they don't believe in magic. Um, they do believe in angels, yeah. But it's not a the Mu'tazila is like a cancer, like it's like when you start to see something is off, like it doesn't actually make sense. That's why it didn't survive. Well, I mean, it's kind of being renewed now, but bit by bit, it couldn't withhold the scholastic aggression of Sunni Islam. So bit by bit, it fell apart. It was just there as now it's just a historical thing. Like by I don't know the 6th century, I don't know exactly when. By the 6th century approximately, right? Hijri, it's like it disappeared. Like it can't withhold it. So it doesn't really make sense. There's fundamental problems with it. So how do they explain angels? How do they explain heaven? How do they explain resurrection? Right? And that's why you find some Muslims, they'll say we don't believe in physical resurrection. That's impossible, right? And then if you think about it, many people will be like, yeah, I could like if you ask me to believe in a physical resurrection, that's a bit far-fetched. That's impossible, right? Whereas if you tell me you believe in a spiritual resurrection, yeah, fine, no problem, right? When you die, your spirit will go on to a spiritual world. Okay, not a problem. But physical, nah, no way, right? Like many people, they'll believe in a creator God, but they can't believe in a creator God that has a will. Like I can believe that there's some kind of power out there, right? If you said, for example, I'm a Jedi, right? The Force, okay? That actually became, I think it almost became an official religion in England, Jediism, right? So I'm a Jedi, right? My prophet is Lord Yoda, right? And I read his quotes every day, and that's how I live my life, okay? But do you talk to the Force? You don't talk to the Force, do you? Like the Force doesn't talk. It doesn't have a will. It's just a power. So people will to get somebody to believe that there's a power out there, yeah, why not? But when you tell them, no, there's actually somebody who is talking to you and watching you and communicating with you and has a right over you, and he chose that you will be here right now to listen to me, and he is going to ask you about what I'm talking to you right now. They're like, nah, I don't believe in that because that's emotionally uncomfortable, right? So a lot of these things comes back to like a huge nafs issue, a huge ego issue. So every single aqidah issue is in reality a spiritual issue. And that's in reality. That's why. Why did the Salaf not have Aqidah? The Aqidah issues what? Khawarij and Shia, right? Deep love of Sayyidina Ali and deep inability to accept oppression and accept anybody else, or the obsession with obedience of Allah. Like Allah has to be obeyed ultimately, right? So the Khawarij, these are different spiritual sicknesses that the Khawarij have or the Shia have. But the Mu'tazila, it's another level, right? It's in reality, it's a breed of the disease that Shaitan has, which is love of yourself. Love of the mind is love of yourself. Same thing, right? I can't be wrong. This is how I see things, right? So people who are stubborn, right? There's pride, right? Like you did mean what you said. No, I didn't mean what I said. I'm trying to explain to you I didn't mean what I said. No, you did. And they won't accept it because they have a pride issue. Right? So in reality, it's a pride issue. Okay, so that's that discussion. We'll go on to the next one. He says, وَصِفْ جَمِيعَ الرُّسْلِ بِالْأَمَانَةِ وَالصِّدْقِ وَالتَّبْلِيغِ وَالْفَطَانَةِ. He says, and describe all the prophets as being, so every single prophet is trustworthy and truthful in conveying the message and intelligent. So we have these amana. So number one, when we say amana, means they don't do sins, right? So prophets don't do sins. Okay, so this is another issue. Who do we find labeling? Again, the Mu'tazila. They will say, yeah, prophets can do sins. We find the Jews doing that as well, right? Read the Old Testament. Super important book to read. Super important book to read, particularly now with everything's happening in Palestine, right? Who is Allah for a Jew and what is a prophet for a Jew? Allah for a Jew, right? I'm not saying all Jews, but the general picture that we see is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a mafia god, okay? Who will destroy you if he hasn't chosen you. He is not a moral, a loving God. He is a mafia god. And you are his mafia crony, right? And you can do bad things because you've been chosen by the big bad guy. And you're okay because you're part of the right family. The other people need to be get out of the place because they're not, So it's not a moral relationship. It's not a spiritual relationship. It's a relationship of power. God has chosen Israel, and Israel will succeed, morally or immorally, right? You will use God's power morally or immorally. You don't have a moral relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in that, what is a prophet for a Jew is just he's just one of these communicators, right? Like imagine you work for this branch of the mafia in this side of the world, and you send some guy to go and go to another branch, right? That's it. That's who he is. He's not a moral person. There's no assumption that he's moral or upright or amazing. It's just he performs miracles because the powerful, right? He's like, that's it. He's just chosen. Like doesn't make him moral. So there's nothing moral and high about him, and therefore there need not be anything moral and high about you. So in reality, this whole discussion about prophets sinning is a whole spiritual problem. I'm a bad person. Everybody in here is a bad person, and I'm happy about that, right? If I smoke, everyone else should smoke. If I do bad things, everyone else should do bad things. When I see that Azhar, for example, he stopped smoking. Sister Maryam, she doesn't watch these kind of films. Sayyid doesn't watch TV anyway. Sister Lavia, for example, she's like, I don't care about the dunya, right? Then I get a bit upset, like I don't feel comfortable. So now I start having bad opinion of other Muslims. Azhar, he's probably a fake Muslim. She's like this, he's like that. And you just start having sort of done bad opinion. And then when you start finding bad things about other people, you feel happy because it's good that other people are as bad as me. And then you start reading history in that same light and reading about the prophets in that same light, and you label as a theological and cultural reality is that there's no such thing as good people. That's a very important thing to understand. This is how they look at things. I'm a bad person. everybody around me is bad, and I'm comfortable with that, and there's no such thing as good people. There's no such thing as like everybody was in it for themselves. Every religious ruler was there for power. That's what it was. King David, he's king. He's not a prophet. I mean, he won the war. He won the battle. Good job, right? So Benjamin Netanyahu, he's the same as King David, same kind of person. Yusha alayhi salam, you know, the big mafia lord, Allah, he enabled Sayyidina Yusha alayhi salam, Joshua, this is again their way of thinking, to kill all the people of the Levant, right? Kill them all. Go into Jerusalem, kill them all, right? Why not? It's not moral, it's just power, right? It's not about good or bad. It's just power, that's all. And there's no good people out there. So therefore, you're okay to be a bad person. It's fine, right? It's like, for example, you are a sheikh and you have zero focus in prayer. So now you come and change the deen. You say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't ask us to do what we can't do. So you tell it, you don't actually encourage people to focus in prayer because you don't focus in prayer. And then when you hear stories about so-and-so, he used to do this, you're like, it's just stories. It's weak, right? And you see, even the Prophet ﷺ, he did this, even this, and you start labeling the Prophet ﷺ as just a normal human being because you have no sense of what it means to be amazing. So this is a Jewish way of thinking. This is a Mu'tazili way of thinking. To some extent, also a Salafi, to some extent, kind of way of thinking as well. Some Salafis are like this as well, right? Where, diminish the sense of the special in me, diminish the sense of the special in anybody else. And then the Prophet ﷺ is also not that amazing. He's just, he's just a prophet, that's all. Like, don't, and, he's worldly like me and you, right? And that's it. Whereas if you are deeply spiritual, you look at other people as deeply spiritual, you have a good opinion of other people. And then the way you read history and the way you read the Quran, you read the Hadith, is like, yeah, everyone's totally amazing. So the way that we see things is that meet Muslims, right? You will find today in the 21st century totally amazing people who do not do sins. I remember there was a sheikh, he was living in a house, right? This is a 21st century sheikh. He was living in a house and he moved out of the house and he told somebody, he said, somebody who was moving in, he said, don't disobey Allah in this house. Because I've been in this house for 20 years. I have not disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ever in that house for 20 years. And I don't believe the sheikh is lying, right? And there are people who are focused in prayer, 120%. And there are people whose last thought when they go to sleep is Allah, and the first thought when they wake up in Allah is Allah. And that's how they are. And there are people in the world who do not do things for worldly reasons. They don't give a khutbah because they're going to get paid. They don't give they're not trying to record this and put it up on YouTube because they want to get more hit people liking them. That's not what they're not into those things. They do exist. There are pure people. And so these people who then read into the hadith and read the Quran, the way they see Islamic history and the way they see the Quran is like, yeah, of course, like this is how people are. And if a hadith sounds a bit confusing or a story in the Quran seems a bit confusing, they can read it in the right light. And when they read the Bible, they're like, no, this is not true. No prophet would ever do something like that. No prophet would be that indecent. Right? Somebody who has that deep relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not be like that. It's a totally different way of looking at things. But can we see how it all comes from? It all comes from the self. How are you as a person? I am disgusting spiritually, and I am happy when I see other people who are low and disgusting spiritually. And I have a bad opinion of everybody else, and I assume they're like me or worse. And I'm happy when I find out their faults, and I interpret everything around me in the bad sense. And extend that to history, extend that to the Quran, extend it to the Bible. Or I'm a beautiful person who has some faults, but I've tasted Iman. I know what Iman is. I know what Zuhud is. I know what it means to not to care about the dunya. I know what it means to be pure, right? I may not always be like that, but I know what that's like. And I do believe in it. And I have seen people who are like that. And so when I read about certain people of the past who are amazing, I believe they exist. I'm not like, oh, that's just made up. Oh, that's just made up. And when I hear the Prophet ﷺ, I understand the Prophet ﷺ as this is the Prophet of Allah. And he is like ultimate purest person. So then if a story is confusing, I interpret in a proper light. If I read about Sayyidina Dawood, Sayyidina Isa, it's all done in a normal sense, right? I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. I was reading in the Tabaqat of Ibn Sa'd, right? This Ibn Sa'd, um, uh, one of the great early hadith scholars and historians, he has a book called Tabaqat, like the history of scholars. And so he mentions that Ibn Umar once beat one of his wives so hard that her belt fell off. So I'm like, oh man, that's shocking, right? That's really shocking. That's really disturbing. So let's go through the same psychological journey, right? The same psychological, emotional journey. I'm a really bad husband, and I'm a bit violent sometimes, but and that's normal, right? Other people, they just hide it. And so when I find out that other people have marriage problems, I'm like, yeah, good. I feel comfortable because I'm okay with being a really bad person and having a really bad marriage, and like I'm okay with that. And when I find out that other people have problems, it makes me feel good because I have envy when I hear others. So it makes me feel good. And so I understand and I label everybody else as like, yeah, this person's probably cheating on his wife. That's just normal. This person probably does this. This probably person does that. That's just normal. And so I have this kind of thing that my life is really bad. Other people's lives are really bad. The past is already bad. And look, he is a Sahabi, right? So I have an argument with my wife. She's like, Fareed, you're not a human being. What's your problem? And I'm like, well, here's Ibn Umar. What's your problem? Right? And notice how I had to quote a thing like, he had a domestic violence, wrong with that, right? And then I read, and then I'm like, yeah, the Prophet was probably like that too, here, there, probably got angry for himself, right? He probably got married, he probably got married multiple times, because he likes women. That makes sense, right? It's halal, so why not, right? If I'm like that, if I'm a halal womanizer, why can't the Prophet be like that? And why can't Sayyidina Dawood and what, etc. And I just listen, just like that's how it is. Like I don't promote any kind of like high morals myself, and so I don't see it in anybody else, and I just label it like that. So I read this quote: Ibn Umar hit one of his wives so hard that her belt fell off, and I just like and I interpret in a bad light as opposed to interpreting in a good light. I mean, this is Ibn Umar for crying out loud. This is Ibn Umar. Like this is one of like the best Sahaba ever. He's such an amazing person. He's the one who told us, be in the world as if you were just a traveler, some passing by. So now I'm going to interpret any anger that he did for the sake of Allah. I'm going to say, well, maybe it's not even true. And if it was true, maybe he made a mistake and he made tawbah. And if it is true, maybe it was for a good reason. And maybe he didn't actually hurt her. And maybe it was, for example, she had said something about the Prophet or something. He got really angry, right? So can you see how I interpret things based on who I am? Now I read the Quran, I read the Hadith, and I extend like that. And so this is very, very important. People read things and interpret things based on who they are. If they're really bad people, then they just look at everybody else as bad. And if you're really good people, you look at other people as good. Does that make sense? Can we see that in the context? Does that make sense? Let's say Benjamin Netanyahu reading the Old Testament, right? He's like, yeah, like I am the continuation of the Old Testament. The Jews turned up in the Levant. God helped them to control. That's what I'm doing. Like, what's wrong with me? So that his relationship with God is very, very different to Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, right? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, I'm a slave of the most merciful kind. As that phrase we mentioned before, here I am, I have no rights, I am nobody, I deserve nothing, but I'm just lost shooting mercy at me. What a different world, right? For Benjamin Netanyahu, like he reads the Old Testament and the prophets weren't that amazing. He's like, guys, the prophets were politicians for crying out loud. They're just kings, right? It's just power. So here I'm doing my job. I'm just a politician, right? And I'm just being a politician with God and being a politician with people. What's your problem, right? Why are you even questioning like morality? That's not even a thing to discuss. Whereas the way we see it is the Old Testament is a story of people deeply connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and a fight between good and bad, a fight between lack of compassion and compassion, a fight between uh, you know, uh, um, you know, worldliness and unworldliness, etc. That's how we see things, right? And so, does that make sense? Same thing. Somebody who just like, yeah, so the same thing, right? Isn't there an
Yeah,
mentions that people will be misguided with the Quran? Yeah, by the Quran, yeah. يضل من يشاء, right?
yeah,
What's the verse? يهدي به كثير يضل به كثيرا. He misguides through the Quran many people, right? It happens. So anyway, going back to the point is, we read any stories about prophets. For example, Sayyidina Musa killing somebody, Sayyidina Adam eating an apple, the Prophet ﷺ turning away from the blind man. Um, uh, so any story that we read, we have two processes. Either that's just a story, it's not even true, right? So you read things in the Old Testament, like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. I definitely don't believe that. That is not historically true. Just ignore it. Or it doesn't mean what you think it means. That's not the real interpretation of it. So Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, Sayyidina, he disobeyed Allah. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? فَنَسِيَ وَلَمْ نَجِدْهُ عَزْمًا. He forgot. So Sayyidina Adam forgot. But you're not sinful if you forget, are you? Right? And some ulama, they go the extra step, which you don't have to go. They go extra, so he intentionally forgot. Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him outwardly to not eat it and inwardly to eat it. And so he kind of played a game. He was like almost like a pantomime, like showing us what do we do? How am I going to show my kids what to do when they sin? Okay, let's say, for example, let's do this game. I'm going to sin, right? And so that you don't have to go to that extra mile, right? So I think Ma'ruf al-Karhi, or one of the awliya, he said, if I were Adam, I wouldn't have bitten it. I would have eaten the whole thing. Meaning, like, he had such a good opinion of Sayyidina Adam that there was something special happening here, right? It's like Sayyidina Khidr. He's doing things that we don't understand. He's not going around murdering people or breaking things. He's doing something special. So Sayyidina Adam was like that, right? Do we have to really go the extra mile? No, but we do have to say Sayyidina Adam was not a sinful person. He did not do sin. He made a mistake, right? And because of his high rank, he was spoken to in a way that he uses language like asa, he disobeyed, if it's not like technically disobedience, and he's punished even though there's no sin, right? And he's showing us what to do, how to repent. So for the Christians, Sayyidina Adam is the original sin, right? And then you are born with the original sin, right? And notice it's connected to sexuality, right? When you reach puberty, you have an Adam's apple. Like, you have the sign and the guilt of your great great grandfather's sin, which is now you have reached puberty and you are sexually inclined. How evil and how bad that is. You need Jesus to die on the cross to save you. That's the way they see it. For us, it is not the original sin, it is the original repentance. So Allah Sayyidina Adam taught us how to repent. رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا, etc. Right? Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, what, did he intend to kill somebody? No. He didn't intend to kill somebody. Right? He's trying to defend somebody and then he accidentally killed him. Okay. Other stories. Sayyidina Sulaiman with the horses, stroking the horses and missing Maghrib, right? So what was happening is, what, he's into the dunya. He really likes the dunya, and he got distracted and missed the prayer. No, what he's seeing is like, this is a huge means for me to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. MashaAllah, tomorrow I'm going to go into battle with these horses, and horses are new. You have to understand, domesticating horses are new. They were domesticated, I don't know how long ago, in Central Asia, but in ancient Egypt they didn't have horses. They had donkeys. Right? So domesticating horses was something that's coming. I don't know when exactly Sayyidina Dawood, so by the time of Sayyidina Musa, probably they had domesticated horses by then. I don't know when exactly, but it's not something that is, so it's a huge thing, right? Domesticating camels was not that long ago either, relatively speaking. So it's something like a huge benefit, right? Wow, I can do jihad. This is a huge thing. So he's busy with one type of worship, which is jihad, and preparing for that over another, right? Not that he's busy with the dunya over worship, right? Sayyidina Dawood is the opposite. Sayyidina Dawood, has to judge between people and he wants to pray. And so he's busy praying. And then suddenly someone turns up and asks a question. He's like, oh, it gives an answer. He's like, no, if you're going to give an answer, you need to ask both sides of the question. Who's on the two sides? Okay. And who's on the two sides? And you have to, if you don't know the answer, you don't rush to answer it, right? I don't know the answer, that's it. And don't rush, right? And so he was like, SubhanAllah, why is he rushing? Because he wants to worship. So so he's being taught, and we're being taught this balance. Like you have to know the priorities of what Allah wants. You can't just worship Allah in one way and not the other, right? But is it, for example, that he's a bad person or an oppressive person? No. Or a worldly person or whatever, right? And again, if you read the stories of the prophets, you'll see stories that don't make sense. Like a person's like really bad. And it's like that's just not true to begin with, right? Did the Prophet ﷺ, for example, see Zainab, his adopted son Zayd's daughter, and then say, I kind of like her. Hmm, how am I going to change this? Okay, let's make it revelation that you can't have adoption, because let's make it haram, and let's also make it halal to marry her, so I can marry her. Is that the Prophet ﷺ? That's not the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ, if he is shown that he's going to marry somebody, right, that that's not a sin. Now, what we're told in the Quran is that the Prophet ﷺ was like shy of sharing that with people because everyone's going to say, well, how could you marry your son's daughter? Doesn't make sense, right? And then later on, we're going to find out that there's no such thing as adoption. You can't adopt. Like, oh. So you come along and be, yeah, the Prophet ﷺ, I know why that happened. The Prophet ﷺ just basically wanted to change his Sharia. So, it's like, subhanAllah, you believe in that? You believe the Prophet ﷺ changes Sharia because he wants to marry some woman? Was the Prophet ﷺ, number one, was the Prophet ﷺ into women? Is that what you're trying to say? Prophet ﷺ, like he liked the dunya? Have you heard about the Prophet ﷺ? Do you know who the Prophet ﷺ is? What are you talking about? The Prophet ﷺ did not marry women because he's into women. SubhanAllah, the Prophet ﷺ married as generosity, a way of teaching people. He's giving. His relationships were purely giving, not receiving. Right? He didn't need the dunya at all. He's not interested in dunya. The Prophet told us multiple times. And so what I'm trying to say is when we come along with these stories from the prophets or this or that, it's like either that story is not true, or B, you're misunderstanding it. Why are you misunderstanding it? Because of the filth that's in your heart. That's why. And then that filth creates creed, and that create dogma, and that's aqidah, creates religions. Right? So remember this principle, every single Aqidah problem stems from a spiritual problem in reality. Every single one of them. And that spiritual problem comes out, creates a sect, and the sect creates a religion. And that religion is now the product of that same filth, the same problem, the same perversion in that person that spread and spread and spread and became a whole movement and became normal. And many people are like that. Today, again, the West, for example, is cynical, right? Cynicism is part of the West. So you grow up in the West, you're like, yeah, like there's no such thing as special. There's no such thing as sacred. Everybody's just in it for themselves, so just forget it. Why would I respect my mom? Did she respect me when I like did she have me to respect me? Right? So when you live in a society that, I don't know, I talk about these things, but reality, right? Like my mom told me I was an accident. So then like why would I even respect her? So I'm an accident. My parents' relationship is meaningless. The president is just trying to get money. Nobody in my world is noble. Why would I interpret anything as noble? So of course these guys are all sellouts. Of course every prophet is just whatever. There's nothing real. So you live in a world of nihilism. You live in a world of cynicism, you live in a world of materialism, you interpret everything like that. Right? A Marxist looks at the Bible, yeah, it's a struggle between the classes. That's all it is. Religion is just a product of the struggle between the classes. That's all. Right? Psychiatrists like, or sorry, psychologists like Freud, he says, yeah, here are people who have they have a weird problem with their sexuality that creates this problem, that problem. God is the same thing. God is just a product of someone's basically a mental problem that has come from their weird understanding of their own sexuality. That's all. That's what God is, right? So notice every single person has a spiritual problem or everything, and it creates a whole theology, a mindset, and something else. So somebody growing up in the West, yeah, of course your prophets sin, right? We all sin. No, nobody is good, right? Nobility is not a thing anymore in the West. We don't value nobility because it doesn't exist. We've given up on nobility. Our rulers are so ignoble. Our cultures are so ignoble. That's just normal. It's not a problem, right? Like embarrassing yourself, doing something indecent is just okay, right? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? That's a phrase, right? Big deal. As long as you pay your taxes, don't worry about it, right? So you live a life like that, and then you come and read the Bible. Yeah, yeah, just assume everybody's bad. Read the Quran, assume everybody's bad, and you have the same mentality. Whereas you live a noble life, a beautiful life, a pure life, you interpret things in a different way, and you have a proper aqidah. Okay? So does that make sense? Yes. Okay. So he says, so what is it? Sidq, they spoke the truth. Amana, tabligh, they conveyed the message. There was nothing mixed out. And fatana, they're all intelligent. Inshallah, we'll stop there. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحان الله وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك